The Carpenter and Death. The stars sparkled in the heavens, and the moon shone its pale light upon the earth. The snow was crisp underfoot as along the road travelled the carpenter's apprentice. He was skilful at his work, but also the kind of free-spirited young man who would rather roam the world from door to door, one village to the next, than be tied down to one place. Under his arm he held the tools of his trade, a plane and a saw, and on his back a small barrel of wine, as he hurried along hoping to find some warm, welcoming house that would take him in for the night. On through the night he trudged through snowdrifts deep and cold, and the forests dark and dank. He was about to give up hope of finding a place to sleep, when suddenly he heard the sound of sleigh bells approaching, as someone drove up behind him. Well, someone, not just any old someone, his particular someone happened to be none other than Death himself, becloaked, grim-faced, black-hooded, driving before him a handsome black stallion, whose bridle gear jingled and jangled as they galloped along. "Hey, you there, my fine fellow. Who might you be?" called Death from his sled. "Who would have thought that you could tell from the tools that I carry?" answered the carpenter's apprentice. Death looked closer and smiled. "Well then, my fine woodworker, tell me, what do you have in that keg?" "Oh, I would have thought that you could guess. It's full of wine, of course." Death considered this for a while, and then asked the apprentice, "Tell you what, I'm cold from my long drive, and I can see you are tired from your journey. Give me a drink to warm me a little, and I'll carry you along with me on my sled. Save your legs for a while." The night was getting bitterly cold, so this seemed like a reasonable deal. Apprentice gave Death a good swig of liquor from the barrel, and proceeded to make himself comfortable on the sled. And shoo, off they went, flying through the night like a comet over the snowdrifts and banks. The wind whistled in the carpenter's ears, and the frost pinched at his nose as the forests and farmlands became a blur with the speed of their passage. "Give us another tug on that firkin of wine," called Death. "It's bitter cold driving here." "Oh," said the apprentice, "can't be giving up my wine for nothing. What will you give me in return?" So Death answered, "I'll give you a magic hat, a hat that allows the wearer to walk unseen." The apprentice agreed, gave Death another drink, and Death handed him the hat. He promptly placed it upon his head, and he felt well pleased with himself as he immediately faded from sight. The wine was good stuff, and before long Death began to feel a little merry, and he asked again, "It's good stuff in that firkin of yours. Give us another shot of the liquor now, my good man, and you shall have my magic purse. It has the power And whenever you give it a shake, all those nearby will be filled with deathly fear and remorse. The apprentice once more handed the cake to Death and was rewarded with the purse. And they drove, and they drove, and they drove with breakneck speed, and at length the reaper began to speak as they approached the lad's mansion. "You see that big hall up ahead? This very night I am due to bring an end to the daughter of that household. Now why don't you come along with me and watch how I go about my trade?" The apprentice could see no reason why not, and thought he might well learn a thing or two, so he accepted the invitation and went with Death, who stopped to tie his horse up to the halter post in the courtyard before going in. So the apprentice went on ahead, and upon entering the house, he could see all manner of folk gathered inside, family and servants alike, and every one of them was in floods of tears, for the beautiful daughter of the house was stricken with foul sickness, and they all feared she would not last the night. The apprentice went close to the master and whispered into his ear, "Alas, I bring sad news. Death has come here this night to take your daughter. But I might be able to save her." The master, shocked and astounded, pleaded, "Please, good Carpenter, by all means, save her if you can." So they led the carpenter into a chamber, in the center of which the sick girl was stretched out upon a large bed. The carpenter was skillful at his trade and able to work fast. He took out his saw and plane and set to work, and before you knew it, he had fashioned from wood a pivot and fitted it under the bed, so that the entire bed could be turned about the spot like a spindle frame. And this done, then he placed Death's hat once again on his head and waited invisible for Death to enter the chamber. Death walked in. He went promptly to the head of the bed, raised his kite, swung it down to the poor girl's neck, but quick as a flash the invisible apprentice turned the bed about its axis, and the deadly blade plunged harmlessly into the straw and feathers of the mattress. Nonplussed, Death walked round once again to the head end of the bed and struck again, but again the apprentice spun the bed, and the kite struck nothing but sheets and blankets. Frustrated in this way, Death became irritated and raised his kite again and again, but to no avail. Every time the blade descended, the carpenter spun the bed, and the girl was left unharmed. Death became more and more angry with each swing of his weapon, until finally, swinging wildly, the blade of his kite caught the stone fireplace and broke in two. With the kite lying broken, Death could do naught but leave the chamber and the girl lying within and return into his sled. As Death was in the courtyard, climbing aboard his sled, ready to drive on to the next town, the apprentice crept up close and took out the purse, the magic purse which Death had given him. In a trice he began to shake the purse for all he was worth, and immediately Death himself became filled with deadly fear and remorse. "Please, good Carpenter, don't be shaking that purse anymore. I'm afraid." The apprentice just laughed and answered, "If I stop, you must promise never to return to kill the girl or me. Now be quick, give me your word. Death swore the oath, promising never to kill either of them. So the apprentice stopped his shaking. The Death continued on his way, and the apprentice went indoors and slept by the fireside. In the morning, he woke up early and left the house in silence to continue his wandering. The apprentice roamed the world for many years, with no cause for sadness or grief. But one day something happened that caused the wanderlust to go from him. He got the news that the master of the house was forcing the daughter to get married to the village tycoon. At this, the apprentice was filled with sadness on her behalf. Quickly, he made his way to the village where the girl lived and got there just as the wedding lanterns were being hung on the fences and the candles were being lit in all the windows. The ceremony was about to begin, so the carpenter hurried inside, first making sure to place upon his head the hat that he had got from Death, so that no one could see him. Oh, how beautiful was the bonny bride! Oh, how lovely the sweet wedding crown upon her head! And oh, how her pretty face was filled with sadness and tears. As the ceremony began, the girl cried out in grief, "Oh, please, don't make me marry this old fellow. I have another in my heart, he who once saved me from death. But alas, I fear he cares not a fig for me." The poor girl was scorned and ridiculed and forcibly taken towards the lector, where the priest stood ready for the marriage. But at that moment, up jumped the carpenter and drew from his breast pocket the old purse that Death had given him. He began to shake it heartily, and immediately all the village folk turned pale with the deathly fear and remorse and began to scatter from that place. "Oh, woe is me! How could I ever force my daughter into marriage?" called out the master. "Oh, woe is me! How could I marry this girl against her own will?" called the miser. "Oh, woe is me! How could I ever have considered forcing marriage vows upon so mismatched a couple?" cried out the priest. "We shall die, we shall die! Oh, fear and woe to us all!" wailed the guests. And at that, the carpenter drew the hat from his head and stood in full view amid the wedding guests. And at once the girl ran to him, threw her arms about him, sighing, "You came at last." So the priest carried out his true duty, and the apprentice and the girl were wed. The fence lanterns were lit, and shots were fired into the air in celebration, and their life was indeed carefree and happy, since they had a promise from Death himself that he would never ever come to collect. End of the story.